I'm chair of the Council's Committee on Civil Rights. This hearing is going to be on docket number 0518, a hearing regarding enforcement of the Boston Trust Act. This hearing is being streamed live online on Boston City Council TV. It's being recorded and will also be broadcast on Comcast Channel 8, RCN 82, and Verizon 1964. I didn't know channels went up that high. But as a reminder, I'd ask you to please make sure your phones and other devices are on silent, and we are going to proceed. I'm going to begin with a brief background here, and then we're going to invite our district attorney to make a statement that she has, and then we're going to get right into with my colleagues, who I'm joined by Councilor Lydia Edwards, obviously Commissioner Gross and your team. Thank you for being here. I look forward to this discussion. Just briefly, the purpose of this hearing is to examine the Boston Trust Act. This is a bill that we wrote, or law at this point, that we wrote in collaboration with the BPD, former Commissioner Evans, civil rights organizations, and Mayor Walsh in 2014. It was passed unanimously by the Boston City Council, signed by Mayor Walsh as an expression of this city's values when it comes to civil rights, when it comes to making sure that people, regardless of immigration status, feel they can come forward and engage with our city agencies, with law enforcement as victims or witnesses of crime. I'm quite proud of that legislation. I'm proud that the city was a leader on that 5 years ago, passing one of the most expansive versions of this bill across the country. But 2014 was a different time. It was before the election of President Trump. It was before, I think, a wholesale change in immigration enforcement. Just this week, the current or immediately past director of U.S. Immigrations and Customs Enforcement was ousted by President Trump because the president wants to go in a, quote, tougher direction on immigration enforcement. I want to make sure that this body, this city, is doing everything we can to enhance, to comply with the spirit of the original Trust Act and to examine ways we can make it stronger, because things have changed over the last 5 years. There was a recent incident, and we're going to hear about, delve into that a little later on with an individual in the city, Mr. Paz Flores, which was concerning to me and to many, and somewhat of a catalyst for this hearing. And we are going to look a little bit more into that and would love to hear what's being done administratively on that front. But this hearing, in calling for it and administering it, my goal is primarily to determine what, if any, updates are necessary, either legislatively or through the mayor's office or through you, Commissioner, to make sure that the original intent of the Trust Act is followed, to make sure that the Boston Police Department, I think, is the finest police department in this country and has many well-deserved accolades when it comes to community policing, when it comes to engagement with our community, continues to do the best that we can in a very changed landscape, in a landscape that is pretty unprecedented in American history, with aggressive enforcement of immigration violations, in many cases racially based enforcement, and those are things that, as this body, this city council continues to stand up for. I know Mayor Walsh and I know you, Commissioner, share those values and look forward to figuring out how we can work more together on that. So I'm going to hold off on questions. I don't know if my colleague has a brief opening statement, and then we're going to turn it over to District Attorney Rollins to give her remarks.
Thank you, Councilor Zakim, for your leadership. Before I had the privilege of joining this body, I remember working with many nonprofit organizations, and we were extremely proud of your getting that done in your first term and passing the Trust Act. I want to also thank the law enforcement officers for being here today. It's one of those conversations that I think is necessary, but it actually makes our democracy stronger by talking to each other about how we can assure that everybody in Boston feels safe, that they can trust law enforcement, and also just making sure that we check in with each other about the resources that you have, how they're functioning, how they coordinate with and follow the ordinances and the spirit of the Trust Act, and also the practical realities that you do face and making sure that we are safe. So I do look forward to hearing about how we're going to rectify the ICE unit specifically with the existing Trust Act, and making sure that we understand that we both have the same goals. Before I end, I just wanted to acknowledge the incredible advocates in the audience. My many jobs ago, I started at the Brazilian Immigrant Center, where I learned about immigrant advocacy, learned Portuguese, learned about organizing, so I want to acknowledge that. Also the Worker Center with Diego Lowe, Lydia from the Brazilian Women's Group. I just have to acknowledge them because it's those groups is where I cut my teeth in organizing. So to those immigrant women and men, I want to say thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. And we'll also be joined by our colleague, Councilor Ed Flynn. Councilor, do you have a brief opening remarks? Great. Well, thank you. And Commissioner, I want to thank you for being here. I know we've talked, and you've graciously yielded the beginning time to our District Attorney, Rachel Rollins. And Madam District Attorney, if you would like to approach, I know you have some comment.
Appeals.
Oh.
So this is not the zoning board of appeals.
Yes, go up to the 8th floor. This is not where you want to be.
Right. Ooh, this is, maybe I'll walk over here and see. This is better. I also want to make sure we acknowledge there are lots of brothers and sisters in law enforcement that have attended as well. So my name's Rachel Rollins. I'm the District Attorney of Suffolk County. I want to thank you, Committee Chair Zakem, Vice Chair Flynn, who I just saw, and Councilor Edwards. In 2014, this City Council and Mayor Walsh proclaimed that Boston's law enforcement officials should not detain a person on a civil immigration detainer or administrative warrant after they were eligible for release. The Boston Trust Act established that absent a criminal warrant, these processes were insufficient to deprive a person of their liberty. As it has been so many times before, Boston was once again ahead of its time. It would be 3 years before the state's highest court reached the same conclusion, ruling that Massachusetts law provides no authority for local law enforcement to detain people on civil matters, quote, let alone authority to arrest specifically for civil immigration matters. And that, of course, is the Loon v. Commonwealth case. I defer to those with specific knowledge of the events being discussed here today, but I want to express in the strongest possible terms my support of the Trust Act. The efficacy of our legal system requires the participation of all persons, and the fear of arrest, detention, and deportation for civil immigration matters has a significant chilling effect on our ability to do justice in the courts of Suffolk County. To the extent that the Trust Act may mitigate those fears, I believe it to be a necessary and valuable ordinance. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll submit this letter for the record. And thank you, Commissioner. And sir, that I don't remember your name. You as well.
Thank you, Madam District Attorney. I appreciate you taking the time to be here and your partnership as one of our lead law enforcement officers, obviously for the city of Boston and for the entire county. It's an important partnership, so thank you for that. Commissioner, I will turn this over to you. If you or your colleagues have any opening statements or comments, we'll do that and then go into some questions. So thank you, Commissioner.
Good morning, Councilor. Thank you. Councilor, again, thank you for allowing us to be here today. And thank you, everyone who's here in the audience today. Thank you. Of course, thank you, too. So I'm your 42nd Boston Police Commissioner. My job is to serve you. I'll just give you a little personal background. When I came to this city, after hailing from Hillsborough, Maryland, population 164, I looked different, I sounded different, people looked at me different. In no way would I ever do anything to not have empathy, sympathy, care, and respect for someone who was just like me. The Boston Police Department is the first police department in the nation. We are the leaders in community policing. We believe in the Trust Act. Despite what's happening in Washington, D.C., we will not be its scapegoat, because in Boston we do things bigger and better. And we are held accountable by a great city council and by a great mayor and by the people. When I say we're #1 in community policing, we are. I was raised by the very community that welcomed me in when I came from a poor farming community. And I'm proud to be here today as your 42nd Commissioner, ensuring that we, the Boston Police Department, protect everybody in not only this Commonwealth, but this city. With that being said, if I may, Counselor, we, the Boston Police Department, honor and abide by the Trust Act. The Boston Police do not enforce federal immigration laws. We enforce state laws. Boston Police do not check immigration status, in the face of possible criminal activity. We determine identity. Boston Police try to solve homicides, and we do. Stop human trafficking and drug trafficking, and we do, period. Regardless of who is responsible. Our partnerships with federal authorities are important tools, and cutting ourselves off from partnerships and resources would be a mistake, because we are here to protect the Commonwealth and anybody who is a victim, no matter where they hail from. It's the duty of the Boston Police Department to protect everyone in the city of Boston. We do so regardless of who they are, or where they're from, or what immigration status they might have. We do our level best to do our job smartly, professionally, and with compassion. The Boston Police Department follows the Trust Act in letter and in spirit, and in keeping with the policies and values so often expressed by Mayor Walsh. In carrying out our duties, we do not differentiate the people we serve based on their immigration status, their race, their income, whether they are a Boston resident or someone who is simply works or is visiting here. They are treated the same. No matter who you are or where you're from, you have a right to be safe. We do all that we can to keep everyone safe and to treat everyone with dignity and respect, and to serve victims, especially with sensitivity and compassion. The Boston Police work hard to build cooperation and support in every neighborhood. But we also take special care to try to build trust in those communities where people have been historically disenfranchised, marginalized, and victimized. And I'm from one of those communities. We're talking empathy, sympathy, care, and respect. I lived it. Boston Police do not ever ask a victim of crime what their citizenship or immigration status might be, nor do we do so for witnesses. We do this because no matter who you are or where you're from, no one should live in fear. No one deserves to be victimized. Everyone has a right to be safe, and we want people to seek justice through us and the courts. There's been a great deal written about how our department does and does not interact with federal immigration and custom enforcement, also known as ICE, and with an individual in a case that was written about. There are some aspects of this matter that we can't really speak to, not because we are not transparent, but because we must be obedient to certain laws, especially Corey, where we cannot mention someone's arrest or not, because they are Corey protected. Corey, which are designed to protect the individual. In closing, it is important, however, that you understand how we do our jobs and to dispel misperceptions that are unfair to good and brave police officers, many of whom are in this audience today, and that also cause undue fear in some of the communities where we work so hard to build trust. This work has made Boston and everyone in Boston safer, including our immigrant communities. And in fact, we cannot do our jobs without the support and cooperation and partnerships that extend deep into each and every community of Boston. Sir.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Good morning, everyone. If I may, just want to introduce myself for everybody in the audience, and thank you all for coming. My name is Gregory Gallagher. I'm a Sergeant Detective with the Boston Police Department. It has been my honor to serve the Boston Police Department for 32 years in a number of different assignments, and all challenging. I grew up and went to school in the city of Boston and went through the terrible years of busing when the city was torn apart, and to be sitting here with the first African-American police commissioner is an honor, and to think where we've come in that short time from what it was, it's my privilege and honor to be here. By way of my current assignment, just to go back, I'm sorry, my career has been 32 years. I've won various medals from award for valor, including the Hannah Award, the Schroeder Brothers Medal, and the Medal of Honor on a few occasions. Again, I've had various assignments throughout my career, and I'm currently assigned to the Drug Control Unit. I am assigned to a federal task force and a liaison office with some other task forces federally, and I'm also a DEA sworn marshal, special agent with them on a task force that works clandestine laboratories. Part of my duties with the Drug Control Unit is twofold. In addition to the task forces and liaison work that I do, I'm in charge of a squad of detectives that are part of the DEA Regional Clandestine Laboratory Team. We respond all over New England, including Boston, obviously, to different types of manufacturing of drugs in most hazardous conditions. And I'm also the coordinator, again, with some DCU detectives for the 24/7 DCU response team that is on call during that time for any type of unknown exposure that may occur. Most of the time it's fentanyl, things like that.
Sure.
So that's basically my background in a nutshell, and I'm here to help answer any questions about this incident and just in policy in general, and that we can best serve the people of the city of Boston, which is what my goal is. It always has been.
Thank you, Sergeant. I'll jump into a couple questions I have before turning over to my colleagues, and I will try to be brief because I know there's a lot to cover. I appreciate the sentiment, and I think philosophically we all are in agreement that this making sure that folks feel confident engaging with the men and women of the Boston Police Department is vital to everyone's safety in the city of Boston. Some of the things I'm interested in looking at is, what interactions the Boston Police Department currently has with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. I know there are some systems, record systems, federally administered. Maybe, I don't know if either you can speak to that are somewhat mandatory or that we use, as Commissioner Gross indicated, to identify folks and that may be fed into a system. But aside from that, there's been mention of a BPD ICE task force in the press. Is something like that in existence? And how are our general interactions with Immigration and Customs Enforcement? If either of you gentlemen could speak to that.
Sergeant Detective Gallagher is our expert, and I have him here today so that we can address any and all questions that we're able to, not under the influence or due to any pending lawsuits. So if you could explain, especially our trust act.
Yes. First of all, there's no BPD per se task force, I'm assigned to a task force with Homeland Security. And I am from the drug unit as well.
Is that at the BRIC or is that separate?
No, it's not the BRIC. No, it's Homeland Security Investigations. It's called HIDA Financial. And I'm also the liaison for additional units within HSI and ICE as well. I've been doing this for a very long time, and originally, just for a little background, I don't know if you are probably aware, but the 2006 was the Secure Communities Program was initiated, and Boston was the pilot city for that. So I've been associated with Homeland Security, DHS, roughly from that time, except for a few different stints with the drug unit and some other things.
So in day-to-day activity, ICE has been making administrative arrests. I believe it's around in the last year, I think over 2,000 in the Boston area. That's not City of Boston specific.
Right. I don't have that information. Sure. So if you have that, is that from ICE directly?
It's from their public documents. So, and again, that's them doing it. But my, some question, and I believe Sergeant Detective, this is for you, is does ICE, either to you directly as the liaison through the DHS, communicate when they intend to do operations like that in the City of Boston? Do Boston Police Department staff, employees, resources participate in this? Can you explain to us maybe a little bit how those interactions work?
Well, I can say, first of all, we have an obligation with the public and with Office of Safety. Any federal agency, local agency, or state police agency that is working in the City of Boston, we need to know that they're here and what they're doing. It would be a dangerous situation to have law enforcement agencies come into our city and not be required to talk to us or, just come in and do their thing and not, have no communication. It's a dangerous situation, especially given the climate around the country with the Office of Safety. It's a major concern. So we demand that every time that we want to know what's going on at all times. The commissioner wants to know, I want to know what's happening. So
it's called deconfliction.
And we deconflict, and And the other reason you want to do that is because if you have an agency that comes in and is looking for certain targets or people, they may conflict with our own ongoing investigations, and that's happened on several occasions. And because of the communication that we've established, we were able to rectify that before it happened, so it didn't jeopardize a long-term investigation. So we have communication on a constant basis of any interaction or incidents that are happening, including operations.
So just to clarify though, so if Immigration and Customs Enforcement is intending to make any of their arrests under federal immigration statutes in the city of Boston, they will typically alert either you or someone else at BPD?
Yes, correct. For the most part, I'm the point of contact for that because, again, I've been doing it for a long time. A lot of, you have to understand, Boston police officers and, and city officers in general, there's no immigration authority. Sure. We have no authority to arrest anybody, and I do, nobody has that. So a lot of the people they contact might not know exactly what that is. So for the most part, I'm the person of contact, and if I'm away, somebody from the drug unit will be a person of contact and, let them know what they're doing.
And will BPD personnel participate in those operations, or is it more of we want to know, so if someone sees an operation happening, they call 911, whatever you all and your team are aware that it's
I would say it's a case-by-case basis. If it's if they're individual, if it's a large-scale operation, and that's just not with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. The operations go with different groups within HSI, with the DEA, with the FBI, numerous federal partners. It'll depend on what the circumstances of those are, what logistics will have to be supplied by that, and that actually comes from headquarters, and they make a decision about that.
So yes, I'll just do a couple more before I turn it over to my colleagues. One aspect that's come up certainly in public reports and in concerns is the fusion centers and the BRIC and the interactions between the Boston Police Department and Federal Department of Homeland Security agencies. Obviously, Fusion Center, when it comes to counterterrorism, Homeland Security, other operations, I think, Sergeant Detective, that you've been talking about, is vital, but it also has a tendency or a possibility, I feel like, to blur lines when it comes to immigration enforcement, civil immigration enforcement, which I think we're all agreed is not the responsibility, nor should we be spending city resources on that. So how do you and your team navigate those potential conflicts? Obviously, I think having good relations with federal law enforcement, whether it's the DEA, as you said, you're doubly sworn officer with them as well.
Yes.
But how do we deal with ICE? Because I do, and I don't want to belabor the point, but this is a unique time in this country, and from a moral standpoint, there is a real difference, to my mind, I think many people's minds, of the operations that Immigration and Customs Enforcement are doing, that this president has just, done a purge of his Homeland Security Department because they're not tough enough on immigration. And that is going to be felt, in cities like Boston. Right. So this is as much about preparing for the future. So how would we navigate that? I mean, how do we ensure that the Boston Police Department is focused on, as you said, Commissioner, state laws and keeping people safe versus assisting and even inadvertently in cases of immigration enforcement?
So with the Boston Police Department, we are not the agents of ICE. Right. Our databases are our databases. Our databases come from true intel as well, from the people in the communities, from almost every resource. With that being said, I did have a question when you said something was blurred. What do you mean by that specifically?
Well, I think with the Boston Regional Intelligence Center, and obviously there are Homeland Security funding officers there, and obviously BPD participates, as they should, in the BRIC. But how do we, I guess, ensure from an operational or day-to-day standpoint that, as you said, the spirit of the Trust Act is being followed? Obviously, the letter of the act is BPD doesn't detain people, and there's no question.
We don't.
No, there's no question in my mind.
There's been over 196 incidents. Yeah. We never detained anyone.
Well, 107 just last year, which...
And everyone's eligible for bail. But now that, thank you for clarifying that. For us, there are no blurred lines at all. ICE has their job, and we have our job. Our job is to protect the citizens of the Commonwealth. When we talk about investigations, again, we want to know who's doing what. Who is the person that is a part of that investigation that is a suspect and or other. We never ask about immigration status. We need to identify people because they are suspects. And again, as I alluded to earlier in my opening statement, I don't care where you're from. If you have a nexus to criminal activity, then you will be investigated. has nothing to do with ICE.
Right.
We are not their agents.
Right, and I do think the question that I have is, we're in agreement that city resources and BPD shouldn't be participating in this. I just want to make sure that
Yes.
whether it's
They have their own resources, Counselor.
Okay. And then as far as, we're talking about with this cooperation with DHS, with others, I do think whether it's a policy through your office, Commissioner, or if it's something legislatively, what, to your mind, if anything, to either of you gentlemen, would help to clarify these things to, I think, address some of the, maybe it's a public relations aspect. How do we address this through policy statements, whether it's through legislation, to make it crystal clear that not only are we following the letter of the Trust Act, which, again, there's been no question about that, but part of this hearing, and to my mind, a large part of this hearing, is how do we strengthen that? How do we make sure that there's no confusion in the community and that we are standing, again, in the spirit of things?
There's a couple of ways to do that. First of all, don't believe everything that's put in the newspaper. Come to the Boston Police or come to the City Council. Usually we talk all the time. But with that being said, when the mayor is in public and I'm in public, in any community meetings, I tell folks, and as you all can see, I'm a blunt person, we are not the agents of ICE. We're here to protect everyone. That goes for each and every person in the Boston Police Department. And I agree with you, Counselor, that that should be said, because people glean many things from social media, and then all of a sudden it becomes the God's gospel and honorable truth. And that's not the case. So whether we need to educate people more, like we're here today, and we're proud to be here to educate people about what we're really doing, I think that needs to come from all levels so that the communities of Boston know where we stand, including the government that works with us as well. You're right. These are challenging times. We see what's going on in Washington, D.C., but the Boston Police Department has never wavered in its duties and never gone against the Trust Act. Counselor, we participated in numerous arrests, extortion, rape, murder, gangs. I'll just go from a time frame, from 2016 to now. Over 90 arrests for MS-13 and 18th Street. The victims were the people in the community. It didn't matter what their immigration status was. What mattered is that they were victims. Children being forced into gangs, murdered on beaches and in parks. The multi-jurisdictional and multi-agency cooperations led to over 90 different arrests and 49 convictions in Massachusetts, and clearances of homicide, especially the case where that young man was killed on Constitution Beach, or a young woman was killed in the garage. We didn't ask for immigration status on that at all. We did our jobs, and we protected the people of the Commonwealth, and we will continue to do so. I even took a trip to El Salvador to find the root cause of why gangs are how they are in El Salvador and how they're trying to infiltrate and have infiltrated here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and in the country. We show on a daily basis that we protect the city. After I returned, we worked with clergy, folks in East Boston, to help make sure that kids will not join gangs. They will not be susceptible to violence, no matter where you hail from. But not just in East Boston, in any one of our communities, we are committed. Again, we are not agents of ICE. That Trust Act was put into place for a reason, for Massachusetts and for the city of Boston to show everyone clearly, whether they be in Washington, D.C. or not, that we're just going to protect the citizens of the Commonwealth. You can be from Mars or Jupiter, but if you're a criminal, we will protect people from you. And that's how we investigate. based on a criminal nexus, not because of where you're from or your immigration status.
Thank you, Commissioner. I just have one last aspect about the incident that's been widely reported that we've spoken about in 2017, and the news reports that have in many ways sparked this interest and need, I think, to make sure we're clear on how the Trust Act is. Is there internally in your department procedures in place? Because as reported in the press, the incident with Mr. Paz Flores was very, very concerning, I think, to me, to many others, I'm sure to you as well. And if you or Sergeant Detective Gallagher, who I know is mentioned in those press articles, could shed some light on how that incident came to be and what, if any, cooperation was happening between Immigration and Customs Enforcement or
Sure.
the, I believe, the proprietor of the, or the employer of the individual, how that transpired and what's being done. If it was improper, how we're going to make sure it doesn't happen again, or any light you can shed on that.
Councilor, really, I thank you for inviting us here today to shed light on that and educate people, because I just think that the BPD was held in a bad light. We did our job. We did nothing wrong. So with that being said, Sergeant Detective Gallagher can shed light on that incident and how it came to be, because he was the sergeant, the supervisor that was contacted by the district detective.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have specific questions, or just as you want in general? I don't know if you had any.
I think, well, I would say in the press reports, and I'll summarize this, saying this is to the, WBUR in particular, is that, as I understand it, Mr. Paz Flores was injured on the job at Pires Construction, or Tower Construction, excuse me, and that they had fallen out of compliance with their workers' comp insurance. OSHA, the Federal Occupational Safety and Health Administration, investigated. There were claims going back and forth, and that the employer reached out to a Boston police detective who he knew personally to look into the employee's status, identity, and that then you had been looped into it through your liaison role with DHS, and ultimately Immigration and Customs Enforcement made an arrest that BPD officers were participating in, and that's as it was reported to me, and I would love to hear what reported publicly.
If you mean status of the person's identity and not immigration status, yes. Not immigration status, but we'll let the sergeant go forward.
And how ICE got involved, yes.
So, well, first of all, I think the term looped into it isn't, we have paramilitary is how the police work, so I'm contacted by, it could be at my position, so I don't get looped into anything. I'm contacted by investigators who have cases that they're looking at potentially, and because of my specialty, it may come into play or not. So the detective contacted me, Detective Wancione, stated that, again, that it was his cousin that had a business, and that there was a question about the true identity of an employee that had been injured on the job. He sent me, I asked him, well, what did you have for the information and what was the concern? And he said, again, possible ID theft or fraud type of thing going on with this person. He sent me a photograph of called a green card. It's a legal permanent resident card. That was the only form of identification that was available, that they have that. So in my position, even though I am liaison and also assigned to federal task forces, I do not have access to any federal database. So I have no way to verify whether the card is legitimate or information, nothing like that. And also, the people that I work with, at least in my groups, have no access to the Boston systems either. So I contacted one of the people that I work with, and they were able to run this card, this LPR card, and green card, so-called. And each card has an identifying number specific to that card. So each person, Greg Gallagher has a green card. My number is specific to me. That's my unique number. This particular card, the number came back to an Asian male, which obviously was not the person on the card, and so it was a fraudulent green card. So right off the bat, there's potential state charges for identity theft, possibly, and also that's a federal crime as well, a fraudulent green card if you're purporting to be that person. Further investigation conducted by the agent that I spoke to about the card revealed in his investigation that potentially the person who had this card had an active warrant of deportation that had been issued, I think it was 2002, roughly around that time. There was some further information I'm not at liberty to speak of that is involved in this, and that in fact, he was subject to arrest by ICE. They wanted to arrest him due to the fact that he was a fugitive.
And that information has to do with Corey. Again, we're as transparent as we can be, but we have to be cognizant of the individual's rights under Corey.
Thank you.
Proceed.
Thank you, Commissioner. And so at that point, I informed Detective Cioni basically to those facts, and that if it was further information from his cousin, who was the employer, in regards to this individual. I had conversation with Mr. Pires, was his name. He informed me that the gentleman would be coming in, Mr. Paz Flores, to pick up, I think he's pick up a check money, whatever the case may be. I relayed that information back over to ICE, and ICE was interested that day to pick him up. So basically, on scene, after Mr. Paz Flores left, after picking up his items from Mr. Pires, they conducted a motor vehicle stop, confirmed his identity, and was placed under arrest on that warrant.
So thank you for that, and being cognizant of
Clarifications that you were not.
the court.
A couple of clarifications. The motor vehicle stop was conducted. The sergeant was not present.
That's correct. That was conducted by officers of the Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
And some other points of clarification. It's nice how everything was framed in the newspaper. Here's the cold, hard facts. He was injured at work. He went to the hospital. And then he used a variation of IDs to identify himself. The hospitals contacted Tara Construction. After that, that information was passed on, and he came back with a fraudulent green card. We would not have known who this guy was if he did not pass on different identities to the hospital and then was found to have a fraudulent green card. Again, our investigation was based on who is this individual, the possibility of charging him with fraud. It was an active investigation, not an immigration status.
No, and
just want to be clear because...
I appreciate that, Commissioner. And to follow up briefly, and I'm going to turn over to my colleague, Councilor Edwards. Sergeant, I guess I will say that, that recounting of the incident is somewhat concerning, while not in violation of the Boston Trust Act, is that when Immigration and Customs Enforcement has said only that they're looking for someone for an immigration violation, and that they are subject to arrest, but for a civil immigration violation, I think that's sort of in the spirit of what we're talking about, that we don't want to be assisting in that.
Excuse me, did you say civil or simple immigration?
Civil.
Civil? Okay.
So the deportation order, and again, I'm not saying there was a violation of our current rules or policies, but that's exactly sort of what I'm trying to get at, to ways we can to avoid that in the future.
And here's another thing. When there are arrests made by, in this case, we're limited of what we can say. We can't say if there was definitely a criminal nexus, but we can't say what under Corey. So it isn't simple. It was more complicated than that, but we can't mention it.
Well, as it was just recounted,
Yes.
what the facts that as were recounted here is that ICE said we have a civil immigration arrest warrant or arrest order.
They made that,
This is not a
and they
warrant.
made the arrest, not
Right.
the Boston Police
And there's no
Department.
question about that.
Matter of fact, the warrant
the
was
sharing-
from a
but the-
federal judge,
But the
not
sharing,
BPD.
but the sharing of the information and coordinating with someone who even the Trump administration is now pursuing for labor violations, for issues intimidating his workers to prevent them from filing workers' comp, that's a concerning, to use your word, nexus of what's happening. Again, it's not a violation of our current rules or policies, but this is exactly the kind of thing I want to see what we can do to address, is that if there was a warrant for a fraud, for identity theft that Boston Police or the state police or the FBI or the DEA were pursuing, is one thing, but as just recounted here, it was a civil immigration issue.
Well, this was an active investigation to see who this individual was. He definitely wasn't the Asian male, so we couldn't list an Asian male as the suspect. So this is unique circumstances. Yeah. In the course of the investigation, if an individual is found to have a warrant and it's federal, ICE has the ability and the authority to make that arrest.
No, I don't think there's any question.
So, again, for clarity, what did we do wrong? Yeah. We were, investigating that individual, not immigration status, because variations of name, he's Latino and he's not Asian. So will we do the same thing If, let's say, this guy's from Jupiter, this came to our attention, we'd investigate it the same way. I don't understand.
Well, I will just, I'm gonna, and
What
again,
should be
I keep
different
saying
here?
this will be my last. So I will say that, my concern, Commissioner, is not that there was a violation of our rules, but that this is a situation we could probably, in the future, not want to provide Immigration and Customs Enforcement with the location in coordination with someone who has a vested interest in this individual being deported, being detained, and doing it. Now, whether we could have known that at the time or not, I don't know, but this is also something that we often hear about from workers' advocates, from immigration advocates, that employers, unscrupulous employers, use the threat of immigration enforcement to prevent people from filing claims like workers' compensation. And again, I want to see, looking proactively into the future, can we make sure that BPD is not assisting immigration enforcement and that is not doing this? And I know that we are not ICE agents, that you are not intending to do that. So that's why I think it's important to
Sure, we can
to
have
look at
those
that.
discussions.
Thank you.
No
And
problem.
Mr. Zagam, I just want to say, you mentioned, the Boston Police would not partake with knowledge of any type of unscrupulous activity in an employer. That didn't happen, okay? We had no knowledge about if there was anything going on. And there is a case pending in court, and that'll be determined the facts will come out. But we had no knowledge of anything with that. Basically, it was a fraud investigation, and it can be pursued by the federal agents. The fraud case, that's their choice to make. I can't pursue a federal charge on somebody.
No, and I didn't mean to imply that you were acting unscrupulously, but this is something that happened that is of concern, and we can look for ways to fix it.
I think it's been portrayed in the press as that, and it's actually
Absolutely.
disgusting, to be honest with you, because I'm a professional police officer. I have been for 32 years, and I would never partake in anything like that, nor would the ICE agents that work or Detective Cioni, to the best of my knowledge. So.
And
Thank
again,
you.
for the record, I don't think the Boston Police or my brothers and sisters in law enforcement and across this Commonwealth should be the scapegoats because of what's happening in Washington, D.C. As aforementioned, all of the arrests, homicide, murder, rape, extortion, we've been there every step of the way for the Commonwealth, and especially for the city of Boston. So, the way we've been painted, like we're the ones that gave the false identity, and that we're the ones that had a criminal nexus, I don't think that's honorable, and it's not being respectful of the men and women that serve this Commonwealth and our United States in law enforcement. We protect the citizens.
Well,
We shouldn't be held as we're the ones that were doing wrong.
Well, Commissioner, I could certainly say from this side of the table, we have our own concerns with press coverage over time, and that's not what this is about. I want to make sure that the city is doing everything we can for our shared values. And with that, I'm going to turn over to Councilor Edwards, who has been very patient. I see we've also been joined by Councilors Asabi George and Councilor Janey. Thank you. Councilor Edwards.
Counselor, good morning.
Thank you very much. So I want to make sure that we're very clear about what we're confused about and what we're questioning. In no way, shape, or form are we questioning your character, your dedication to the city, the historic rise of you being the first African-American male commissioner. In no way is that in question. I have had the privilege to work with many of your officers in A7. I will give them complete and total credit to the amount of outreach and work they've done in our immigrant community, and that has been a work in progress, and Captain McCormick has done an amazing job. The peace walks I've seen you at, the peace walks I've seen our community officer at, this is an indication that, yes, you have taken, without a doubt, us to the next level when it comes to community policing. So I will say that is not in question. But because of the way the things have been reported, because of the fact that we're dealing with DC, because of all of those things, right, we did get the calls, as you can imagine. So did you. But we got the calls too. Frightened people, scared mothers, immigrants who are our constituents and yours as well. So this questioning is not a matter of you not doing your job or you not being dedicated to the safety of folks.
Sergeant Detective.
I apologize.
Gave him a raise.
Thank you.
I did.
He's going to want one after this.
Sergeant Detective Gallagher, all right? So I want to be just clear, because sometimes my tone is misinterpreted as being maybe questioning who you are. And I'm about that process. I'm going to question the process and the civil rights and those things like that. I'm going to be very firm in the questioning about the process. And I want to be clear about how that perspective comes from.
Sure.
I was that
Thank you.
attorney. thank you for that acknowledgement. I was that attorney representing those undocumented immigrants. I have been that attorney, that workers' rights attorney, more times than not, and I have seen repeatedly, and you can see this even when it comes to black and brown men walking, relaxing, sitting down. There's an abuse that is happening of your resources when it comes to targeting people in the community. Now, it'll be something that someone will call the police about someone who looks like they're not from that neighborhood. You can get the call.
And a lot of times the people making the call look like the person they're pointing out.
I know. But to me, it's still an abuse of your time and resources to come out and then you do your job, investigate. The person feels that their civil rights are violated, wondering why are you bothering them walking down the street? And then the trust is further broken down between the community and the police. And it's the same thing when it comes to many undocumented workers, right? When they get the call, when they are fighting for their wages, when they're fighting for their workers' comp, which this man was doing, right? Those are the cold, hard facts. He went to the hospital, which is what you're supposed to do. When you're injured on the job, you are supposed to go to the hospital. The hospital followed complete and total protocol, which is they are supposed to call the employer about workers' comp to see who's going to pay this bill. So the hospital was following protocol. As a result, this is textbook. He didn't have workers' compensation, and he needed to make sure that this person went away. He very likely knew the documented status of his employee. He very likely knew that. And the fact that he was calling you, the police, to figure out the status of his own worker, right? To figure out who this person is working for him. He could have called a lot of other folks. He could have done a background search himself. He could have approached and talked to the employee. He called the law enforcement agency, which to me, you have a lot better things to do, crimes to investigate, than decide if Joe Blow is the proper person to get this workers' compensation check. I feel he used you. I feel he used the Boston Police Department. And as a result of you then going in to investigate this alleged crime that he kind of just, I think, made up to get you there, it's a way of intimidating his worker. And yeah, I mean, it happens all the time.
I didn't know that. Has there been a court case where this has been determined that that was his intent? I don't know.
No,
I'm not being
there hasn't
facetious.
been an actual finding of fact by a judge or jury for any of the things we've said today, including whether they're, like some of the things that you've said or what I'm saying.
And I'm not trying to be smart to you. I was just a point of clarity. I'm like, wow, I didn't know that
I'm telling you from
that trial came through to fruition.
Yes, I appreciate that. But I'm telling you literally from the years of experience in representing workers, that's how it works. You are used in this process. You are called, and you see, and I just mentioned it when it comes to a lot of black and brown men, you are used as a means to abuse and exact or intimidate people. It's offensive, I think, even to you, that you're used. So I guess I want to make sure, and I'm glad we talked about this, there's ways in which we're just apparently going to have to change the Trust Act to make it more trustworthy, to make sure that you are not used in those processes. I want to specifically talk about some of the things that Sergeant Detective Gallagher brought up. You had mentioned, and this is why explain to me, there is no ICE task force. Is that what you said?
No, I'm assigned to I'm detailed from the drug control unit to BPD, and I work Homeland Security and ICE. So a short, my title where I work is BPD, DCU, ICE is basically what it is, or HSI, either one. So
BPD,
DCU, Drug Control Unit, because I'm detailed
Drug
from the
Control
drug
Unit,
ICE.
ICE.
Correct, or HSI, either one.
So it is or isn't, what is that? Is it a task force? Is it a special office? What is that? Is it just you?
Yes, I'm detailed over to this particular HSI group, and I liaison with another ICE agency.
He's a liaison.
So it's just you who is BPD, DCU, ICE?
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
Is this normal in other police departments? Are there other sergeant detectives like this too?
I don't know about other police departments. We have other offices and federal task forces, if that's what you're asking.
No, I'm thinking just city level. That's where I'm thinking. And other cities that are also doing this as well?
Well, I'm sure, I don't know. I couldn't answer that. I couldn't tell you.
I know for Boston Police, we have liaisons to our federal partners.
Yeah, but he's the only one in this task force.
Correct.
The other liaisons are for, because you have all sorts of federal crimes, human trafficking, so on and so forth, whatever. But this one is, and so you told ICE where Mr. Paz was on the day he was arrested by ICE.
I had communication with, yes, correct, the ICE agent involved, right?
Okay. And so, again, not violating, I guess, the Trust Act as it's written, we might have to improve that loop. I won't call it a loophole. It assumes that you guys are trying to get around. Well, we will have to fix that gap. But I guess my concern is, after you had already, or after ICE knew that this person was involved and they're doing their own arrest, their own investigation, they understand that this person is there, why does BPD need to tell ICE where he is?
So.
Once ICE has it and they like,
Yes.
oh, so you did the identity part, which
Right.
you said you
Right.
do. Lydia, let's just use me so we don't get anybody
problem.
offended.
Right.
Lydia Edwards, 5'4", some odd pounds person walks down, is over there, all right? ICE is like, yes, okay, good, thank you so much for identifying. We know she is present. We know that this is the person we've been looking for. At that point,
Right.
why would BPD need to say she's entering in City Hall right now, or she's going over someplace over there? Why does BPD need to then be directing ICE where I go at that point? Once ICE knows the person that they're looking for exists,
Okay. Understood.
why did you need to take?
Elaborate.
So, in other words, if we're giving information to any federal agent, DEA, whoever, and they have issues with that person, you're saying not to tell them where that person is? I don't understand the question
Yeah, well, because
exactly.
I understood that your job was about the identity and making sure.
Right.
Right, and that's where you
Right, in that
guys.
case, that wouldn't be closed until the actual arrest made, because that has to be verified. So there is an identity theft case, obviously, there's a
Right,
going on.
and so you guys were helping them to understand.
Right.
This is her. This is Lydia. Let's just take it away from
Right.
Mr. Paz. This is Lydia. This is her. All right? So I understand from what you guys were talking about, that's really where you guys go to just identify. This is Lydia. This is not Lydia. This person's got nothing to do with it. This person does. So once we've done that,
He
in
still
that area.
wasn't confirmed until
Correct.
the motor vehicle stopped.
Right. The
So-
identity wasn't confirmed. We suspected to be this person, but he could have been somebody
But
else.
it's still a suspect because
Right.
there's so many
It's not-
different names.
It's not complete until the person's identified totally, and that's due to the arrest because of the outstanding warrant. So
You felt you needed to say where potentially I was, or where potentially this person was? You said, he's potentially there, right?
yes,
So that's what I'm trying to figure out, Commissioner. I'm trying to
So-
figure out
And
why.
we're trying to figure out what we did wrong in that case.
I don't think it's a wrong thing. I'm not saying it's wrong.
So I don't
It's
understand why you
compliant.
keep asking us if it's not anything wrong.
Right.
But here's the thing. We still didn't know who he was. They made the motor vehicle stop, and then they determined the identity.
Mm-hmm.
They verified it.
Right, but they knew to stop him at that particular point because BPD told them that this person is suspected to be this person. And that is what I'm trying to figure out, why BPD had a role in helping, beyond just saying, you did your investigation. Beyond that, why are we
The
working?
investigation was even complete
not
because
complete.
we did not know who he was still until they completed the motor vehicle stop. It's not that cut and dry.
Okay, so I think
But if that's something you said we need to work on and we need to change, because
No. I don't think it's something, I think it's being, your practical experience, your real life experience and how things work informs how we should write policy.
Okay.
Right? Their practical experience and how they're seeing things informs how we should write policy. If there's a disconnect where we had a goal of a policy separating BPD from ICE, if that was the goal of that policy, right, and we see that there's not separation due to practical realities, not right or wrong, the practical realities of how you operate,
Right.
then we need to write a better ordinance, is
Right.
what I'm saying.
And we just want points of clarity, too, that if someone is found to have a warrant and we are law enforcement officers, that we're not supposed to, and we took an oath, or just turn the other way, whether they have immigration issues or not. I don't get it. I'm a little confused on that. And again, I'm not being facetious.
I don't feel it, you are. I think we're trying to work this out.
Yes.
And I think, for me, it's just trying to make sure that the last call, or the reason why someone isn't in ICE's hands is not my local police.
Right. And I would say
That's
this
my
as
goal.
well. So that incident happened in 2017, and we're just now talking about it in 2019.
I know.
I'm thinking, if that was so prevalent, wouldn't we have a whole litany of these incidents? That's another thing I don't understand. It
Fair
happened in
enough.
2017.
Yeah.
Counselor, you were counselor then,
20, yes.
2017.
No, I was not.
Not you. I'm talking to that counselor, Zachem.
Okay.
So that's what's kind of confusing us. Why
Mm-hmm.
didn't we have that discussion then? We could have been further down the road. Maybe you didn't know. I don't know.
True, and
But,
I will say this, having been that attorney,
yes.
right, having represented those workers, they also aren't cut and dry and immediate either. You know, there's a lot of ripple effect fear that that individual worker has. Sometimes it's tough to even get my clients to go to the hospital bleeding because they were so scared that they would be deported, not having anything to do with you, okay? So I want to be clear. The last thing a lot of them want to be is in the newspaper with their names.
And we are
Even
right
if-
with you. A
if-
lot of times we have,
We're with you.
trust me, we're right with you. When we see someone that's been victimized
So I'm going
and,
to, yeah.
and
No, and
we
I
want them
feel-
to come forward, again,
Yes.
that's why
But
we
my-
have you visas, like we will protect you.
Right.
We have
but
your back.
My point is, that's probably also feeding into why there's fewer cases that we're here,
Yes.
trickling all the way up to City Hall.
Well, maybe that's something we should work on, and I
Absolutely,
agree.
absolutely. And there's also, when you do investigate and look at
Mm-hmm.
these certain crimes, and these are workplace crimes too. I mean, you could, under workers' comp, after a certain amount of times, you can look forward, and I would encourage you to look forward into Terra Constructions, how many workers' comp claims they may have had, because they're also potentially arrestable as well. So you might want to look at some of the crimes that those employers have committed. Yeah, under workers' compensation
Yes.
laws, there's a certain amount of fines.
We have some info for you, because I don't want to speak for Terra Construction, but
The Attorney General's office looked into this case. I don't know if you're aware of that or not. Are you aware of that?
No.
Okay.
So they did.
And that we cooperated with completely, and basically, from what I understand, nothing came out of that investigation.
and that's why, as I alluded to earlier,
What investigation of what?
of Terra
Terra
Construction
Construction,
Company.
this incident about what you've been talking about and what Councilor Zakin mentioned earlier about.
So when I asked
what
you
his motive
earlier,
was.
again, I wasn't being facetious. I didn't know, I'm like, wow, the Attorney General investigated Terra Construction, but I didn't know the outcome of that case.
Yeah.
So
no,
that's why we're saying, like, I didn't know. Did you
So
know something we didn't know?
I'm not going to belabor with the wonkiness of what the Attorney General investigation, because they could have several open on many different crimes, wage theft, workers' comp, all sorts of different things. And I don't know, which one you're talking about, if they investigated them all completely, what happened. So, but thank you for that. I'll be sure to check in with
Didn't they
Attorney General
investigate
Healy.
This incident
This
specifically?
specific incident was
The AG
by the AG's office.
investigated this
arrest.
incident
This-
specifically.
Right.
But in this incident, there's several issues that they could have investigated, right?
Right.
So you're saying they found no wage theft, you're saying
I
that they
think
found
we
that...
need to have the Attorney General
Exactly,
here.
exactly.
Right.
I
And
think
Terra
so.
Construction.
I think I think they should be in jail. I'll just put that out there, Terra Construction. Because again, from what I have done for years, just like what you've done for years informs what you've done, you got a gut reaction, you know how things are, you kind of know who is in and not telling you the truth. This is just textbook what they did. But I want to
Counselor,
talk...
we will work with you. We need to discuss anything going
Absolutely, and I
further.
think DA Rollins, she's not here anymore either. She's also
We'll
part of the
work with-
team to make sure.
We're all on the same page. Again, this is one unique incident from 2017 that we're just now discussing.
But it doesn't mean it's the only one.
But this case has been portrayed in the media as it's very, very instrumental into what's going on in D.C. and how it's viewed by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts since we have the Trust Act. So this is an instrumental case to determine how we move forward. So we're agreeing with you. It's a little late, but since it's come to attention, we should be working together because it is about trust. And when people are victimized, they should feel free to come to the Boston Police, you or anyone, so that we can help them. But also know this, the people that come here to make this country a better place, to further their bloodline, to work in a nice, safe environment, there are also people that come in right with them that have criminal enterprise in their mindset. So with that being said,
My next
we will also protect the individuals that are residents of this Boston from any criminal, no matter where they hail from. So as long as we're on the same page as that too, then I'm not going to turn my head the other way if someone says, hey, yeah, I did this, I did that, but there could be an immigration status, you should turn the other way because that's what the Trust Act says. So we need to make sure people are crystal clear on that because there's a lot of confusion about that. If we're talking about, and I talk to people in the community, some people think that if someone is questioning us about us questioning them about their immigration status, that they get a free pass. Why is that? And I'm like, that's not the case. So on both sides, we need to educate the public a little more about what the Trust Act is and how we're working together. So I'm in total agreement with you.
Yeah, so I want to make sure I'm very clear also about how, when you do come and how you're called, because I think that, again, to me, it's a matter of abuse of resources. When people call you in on whether there's a black man walking around or sitting down or having Starbucks, we've all seen this, or whether it's the person has now been working for me for years, right? And all of a sudden, I just don't know who this person is. That's my critique to terror construction. I don't believe for one second they're confused about what they're doing. That being said, East Boston High School,
Sure.
and in my school, we had an incident with a young man who was labeled gang-related, and I don't believe it was by the BPD. I think it was by the school officer. And as a result, so some of the critique is about potentially the overreach of some of the school officers and them
Right.
pulling and labeling
I'm
and
aware
things
of
like
that
that.
report.
So please
Matter
tell.
of fact, the individual self-identified. If it's the same report I'm talking about,
Pull it up.
I don't know if I have it. And even that the school police officer, not to be confused with Boston Police School Unit,
Yes.
said that he passed the info to Brick. It never arrived at Brick. He never passed that forward. And maybe that's something we can compare after this because I don't have that report in front of me. But the report that I read stated that the individual self-identified as MS-13. Again, that report never reached Brick, even though it said, because we checked the databases and we're like, we don't have any info from that report. But that is a school police report.
Right.
So
Right. So I don't know if it's this redacted one either. So we'll compare paperwork later.
we got to be aware of redactions.
Let's talk about
We can
process.
definitely talk about that.
Process then.
Matter of fact, I'll get the reports. I'll meet with you, and
I appreciate
and
that.
we can go over that and the.
Yeah. But let's for
Sure.
everyone's education, let's talk about process and help me understand. When someone's labeled a gang-related person,
Gang member?
gang member or gang-related, I assume. I mean, can you be gang-related and not an official member and still be in the nexus that you would be investigating?
You can be associate as well.
Right, right. So that would be something that would prompt your attention, right?
Right.
To investigate. So I guess my concern is that could be just like, having Starbucks while black or being that could be overly used, again, to abuse your resources, to have you investigate people who have nothing to do with those crimes. So when you come in or when you go to see whether this person is gang-related, talk me through that process. You look at, I think it's points, or you look at...
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
No, I'm just genuinely, I'm not trying to be fresh either. There is too much misinformation out there about how you assess individuals. It is too much. And so I want to know, again, will just make me the person. I'm calling about Josh, or Counselor
Right.
Zakem. Hi, this person's in my high
Josh
school.
is a gang member?
I think
we
he
don't
is.
just put him in.
I think he is.
No,
I think he is.
that has to be vetted.
Okay, so tell me about the vetting. Tell me about that. Like how you
So
just...
you just can't say Josh is a gang member.
Right.
There
So
has to be certain criteria.
you guys pick up the phone
Has
and...
he identified?
There
Has he
you
been
go.
identified by courts? The people that we work with in the community in different agencies, you just can't say that Josh is a gang member.
So you guys do the vetting.
Yes.
Okay. Is part of that vetting including passing Josh's information, Counselor Zakem's information to federal agencies to also check about whether he's in a gang or gang-related?
Not to my knowledge.
I don't-
And I have to be more clear because I'm not trying to be elusive.
I don't-
But right now, the Boston Police Department's being sued, and it's about the gang database and
Okay.
Brick.
Okay.
So, again, just for clarity and everybody watching, I'm not trying to be evasive, but there's a pending lawsuit. So, There's only certain things I can answer in only a certain way. And I'd be more comfortable if I check with the attorneys on that, and then you can report back to your constituency. Again, there's lawsuits pending about BRIC, the database, and everything that goes along with it.
So let me just be clear then about what is the questions I have pending that you may not be able to answer because of the lawsuit not being elusive.
But we will go to the attorneys today, and it's like, can we answer this or not?
And I appreciate
And I will
that.
get back to you today.
So when you go back to the attorneys, the question would be about your vetting,
Yes.
right? The vetting criteria that you use, and whether that vetting criteria also loops in federal agencies, including
Okay.
ICE, to determine if that person is also part of a gang or gang
That is
affiliate.
definitely at the crux of the lawsuit. And so again,
Okay.
we'll put you in contact with the attorneys. I have no problem with that at all,
Mm-hmm.
but I did not want it to appear, I know this is being televised, that I'm trying to be evasive
No,
at all,
No.
but, you know, some of those issues are in the lawsuit.
no, and I think that that's at least very clear about what the questions are pending, and then I do take you at your word that if there is a way to get that answer to me through your legal counsel,
You know
you will
me,
get it to
whether
me.
people are chuckling or not.
Yes, I know it. I know you,
this-
and I know
this
you will
will
get that
be,
information to me. I know you.
Yes.
So just some very quick, and I know my colleagues are also interested in getting some information. So let's talk about increasing trust,
Absolutely.
okay? So we talked about, I mean, there's some language that we might want to increase in the Trust Act, but you alluded to the U visa. I have tried many times. It is not that easy to get a U visa, and we can talk offline about
I know
some
a
of
few
the.
cases too, because
But
we are going to have to work together to build trust.
I would love for you to be better, or to increase your partnership in that world, because these advocates here are on the ground. They'll be able to get you those cases without a doubt, of those folks who are going to come forward and do exactly what the U visa requires, report the crime,
And
be
I
the witness.
suggest we go and speak with them together.
I would love to.
And I would love to as well.
About how we can increase that pipeline and how we can increase the approval for U visas, both labor and also, human trafficking and labor trafficking and all these other criminal things that you would be actually
You
investigating
know me
as well.
again, I will go with you, and I will
Thank you.
speak to you, because it's about people being victimized. We're not going to have that.
Right,
And if the
right.
commissioner comes up with, needs help on my end, anything I can do with my contacts, we'll do that to get these visas. They're important for people who are victims of crime, and that's an important thing that they look at as well, so. I'm
Yeah.
happy
So
to
let's
do
see how we can work on that together.
I'd love to increase that
I'm in
pipeline.
complete agreement with you, and I think the sooner the better.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's going to send a message to those folks that are predators and hunters and victimize and abuse, that we are working together.
Right.
And that's why we should have a unified front in combating criminal activity and people that victimize, no matter where people are from, that victimize our residents in this city.
I'm going to turn it over to my other colleague, and then if I have any follow-up questions.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. Councilor Asabi George. You have the floor.
Zachem for chairing this hearing, and Councilor Edwards for your level of detail in your questioning this morning. And thank you both for being here, and I'm sorry
Councilor.
that I missed
And good morning, thank you.
the early part
morning.
of your presentation, but I will certainly go back and review the tape. With the individual that we were talking about earlier,
Yes, ma'am.
not the East Boston case, the other one, where they presented some other identifications, what measures do we take as a city, or do you take in your departments, to protect the identity of those people and their documentation going forward? What can we do to make sure that those aliases that I assume may belong to real people, how do we ensure their protection?
So just to be clear, the immigration card came back to an Asian male. You're talking about protecting that person?
Yep.
At that point, that would be up to the federal investigation, but we're definitely willing to take that over. But
Do we know that that's a Boston resident or someone that is local to this area?
I'm not aware.
I'm not aware either. That's the federal investigation, in the sense that they have the contact information, and if they pursue an investigation and we were needed to help assist with some issue that came up with that, we would do that. But on my own, I cannot
We
access.
would hope that they would
Right.
contact that individual and say,
Right.
listen, somebody's using your ID.
Right, correct.
ID theft, it cost us $107 billion last year.
Well, I think also with that name being associated with such a
Right.
well-known case now.
You think we can
it
find
puts
that
them
out?
at
I can look into
it
that.
puts
We
them
can
at
look into
additional
that
risk.
and see what happens.
Great.
Again, it was in 2017, so may take a while, but we'll get that info
Well,
for you.
we're learning some of the greater details, the deeper details of that case now, so I just want to make sure that we're also taking the steps that we need
protect,
to protect
correct.
those,
People
that
that have their
person in
identity
particular.
stolen,
But you also
absolutely.
mentioned that as part of the case, there were numerous aliases that were presented. So
I said he used a variation
Okay.
of his name. However that was done,
Okay.
the hospital brought that to the light of tower construction.
Okay, and so aside from that, the
Mm-hmm.
specifics of that case, that any individual that may exist whose name was presented, that we're making sure that we're protecting that individual. Through this case, through the East Boston High School case, which I've got a comment about in a moment, what are the things that we're learning as a city and as a department that we're then applying to professional development to support the work of your officers every single day?
I think it's something as simple as what we're doing today, talking, and seeing how we can build trust in the community so that when we do get information about individuals, that we're getting it from true intel. The people in the community, from our systems, it should be a unified front because we've seen a tragedy. That tragedy, folks, was a young man that was identified as an MS-13 gang member. A federal judge said, "Boston police, what are you doing?" The tattoo is for the love of his country, and the knife is for chopping vegetables. 3 weeks after he's released, he and 5 others commit a murder. A murder of a 17-year-old male. We definitely need to start working together to avoid these tragedies. We learned of this through U.S. Attorney Lailing. The affidavit in support of an arrest warrant was publicized about how they brutally attacked this kid, stuck him like a cow, and laughed at him while he was dying. And then on a federal wiretap as well, bragged about how they duped the attorneys and the judge into thinking they were good kids. The only way to combat that is to work together to ensure that our databases and our intel are at such a level that not even a judge would question them, but that can only be done together. So we can avoid any tragedies like that. That was just a tragedy.
Thank you. And then, particular to my experience at East Boston High, as most people know, I taught there for 13 years. And
Thank you for your service.
Thank
That's
you.
a tough job.
The Boston Public Schools police officers that were named in some of that information are people that I worked with for almost all of my years of service at East Boston High, and some of the most dedicated, passionate about their work and serving the kids in that building, and really for me as a teacher in that building, were people that, individuals that I relied on to support me as a teacher, and that our kids relied on every single day. So I want to go on the record in support of those school police officers, because they
It's a
are
tough job.
tremendous assets to that school community at large.
I
but
look
in
forward to
particular,
sharing
kids in
that
building.
incident report documented by the school police with you as well. So hopefully we can lend some clarity to the question and work on how to proceed forward in the
And I don't think
process.
that is in our packet. That's not the school police officer report, because one that I did see maybe last year, a year and a half ago.
Yeah, I want to make
named-
sure it's the
named
same
school police
report,
officers.
but I'd be happy to meet with you and Councilor Edwards, compare what reports we have, and
Great.
so we can make sure that we're clear on how to proceed in the future.
And then my only sort of final closing comment is, as we look to renew the Trust Act and make sure that it's being applied evenly across our city and through our city departments, in particular our Boston Police Department,
Yes.
that it's encouraging and making available professional development within your department that's consistent with the ordinance as the Trust Act as we've passed it here at the council. Thank you, Chair.
Absolutely.
Thank you,
Thank
you,
Counselor.
Mayor.
Thank you both for being here.
I just have a couple final questions, then we do have other folks who are going to speak on a second panel after you gentlemen
make
are
room.
done. Yeah, so I'll be quick. I know this is obviously a very detail-oriented issue, both the specific incident and broader, so it's easy for us all to get into the weeds on this. There are a couple things, for this body, I think, to assess how the Trust Act has been working, when it should be happening, and to your comments about when this incident happening in 2017. It only came to our attention, through press reports and information that my office has been requesting through the mayor's office, through your department, regarding cooperation with ICE or communications and interactions with ICE from BPD would be helpful in us figuring out what the best path forward is. We have asked for this, and we're formally asking for it at the council meeting.
You made a
this week.
request just yesterday, right?
No,
Or when?
well
Before?
well over a week ago, and we've been trying to reach out.
Okay.
But we'll do this, and we can continue doing this because I think it's in everyone's interest to find the best way forward, which we agree on. And then one question I do have about moving forward. California has a statewide, they call it a sanctuary bill, similar to, I think, our Safe Communities Act here, or proposed Safe Communities Act in Massachusetts. And one aspect of it prohibits local law enforcement agencies, including their all California law enforcement, from providing information regarding a person's release date or responding to requests for notification of release dates from ICE. And I think that's somewhat apropos to our discussion here of, not proactively sharing information with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Is that something that either...
Define release dates?
This was release dates. This is about when people are being released from custody.
Okay.
But I think it is somewhat relevant to this discussion about communicating directly with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, information about the whereabouts of people who are going to be arrested for civil immigration violations, not for criminal violations, which we were talking about this incident.
We can definitely talk about that.
Great.
Absolutely.
I think that's...
That'll lend a lot of clarity.
I agree. And I think that's what we want to see here. And I do appreciate you and Sergeant Detective Gallagher's answering and illuminating a lot of these issues for us. I know we're going to hear from some other folks in the community after this, and I look forward to continuing this conversation and making sure that this act is as strong and Boston continues to be as strong as we can.
Right, and I think this should be a unified front because there are people in the communities, believe me, that think that this should be fair for everyone. And that if you're of criminal intent, you should not get a break if you wave like, hey.
Well, I don't think that's...
I'm telling you, all of the newspapers and what's come about, there's questions in the neighborhood. And sir, I'm very blunt. I tell it like it is. So we have a lot of work to do because there's other people who need their trust restored as well, that a person that an immigration judge lets go goes and murders a 17-year-old kid, or other people that are trying to recruit kids into gangs will not get cut a break because they claim like, hey, you can't check on me because you're going to be deemed as going against the Trust Act.
Commissioner, I have confidence in the men and women that work with you and the Boston Police Department that we can keep the city safe as we have through our state laws, through our city ordinances.
But we need to educate as a unified front.
Absolutely, and I thank you for that. And I know Councilor Edwards has one last question, then we're going to move to the next panel.
Actually, it's just, and I appreciate you bringing up the AG's investigation. Luckily, the U.S. Department of Labor has actually just sued directly against Terra Construction, alleging the exact thing of retaliation, that they used law enforcement to specifically intimidate a worker. So,
good to know if they ever call us again. Thank you.
Huh?
I said that's good to know if they ever try to call us again. Yeah.
Terra Construction, yeah. So, but also in general, what I think is really important is that so I wanted that out for the record. They are being sued. The U.S. Department of Labor under the Trump administration is going after Terra Construction for retaliating against a worker and using, I think, city resources unwisely and with a xenophobic way to intimidate an immigrant worker. And I'm happy that they're doing that. But I think one further conversation we should have is when you do find that you've been used in such a way, and when this finding comes out that you were used, how do we compensate the city of Boston and time in the police department, either by you suing Terra Construction or figuring out a way that there's some sort of criminal charges to be used against the individual that would abuse this process. I know filing a false
I'm in total
report.
agreement with you.
I'm ready.
If they're found guilty, due process, then yeah, they should
Then I'd love to
compensate
figure out
us.
how we can
Absolutely.
get them back into BPD's
And again, that'll send a
custody.
message
I
that
think
anyone
so.
else looking to do likewise, guess what? It's not going to happen.
Yeah, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Counselor.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And as Sergeant Detective Gallagher and Commissioner Gross are leaving the podium, we do have our next panel of representatives. Karen Chen from the Immigrant Worker Center Collaborative, the ACLU, Mr. Jose Martin Paz Flores, and Diego Lowe, who will be, I believe, providing interpretation. If you folks would like to come up to the forefront chairs, excuse me, we'll get started in just a second. Any of the four individuals, please take however you choose to order yourself at these 4 seats. As we're switching over panels, I do want to recognize that our other colleagues who had been in here, Councilor O'Malley and Campbell, as well as Flynn and Janey, who did have a conflict but may be rejoining us. So you folks join yourself. I don't know if, is there a particular order you would like to speak in, or?
Counselor, if I may speak, my name is Audrey Richardson. I'm a lawyer at Greater
Sure.
Boston Legal Services. I'll explain my role here. And it was not the original intent for me to speak on this panel. And obviously, there's a couple folks that you're here to hear from. And very importantly, Mr. Paz Flores and his wife, Rosa. But we have a slight request to change plans just ever so briefly because of some of the things that were raised just in this, in the past several minutes here that just need to be explicitly addressed, and that as his lawyer, I can speak to directly and share a bit of information on that the commissioner did not feel that he could share. So, you know, I think, well, I'll just speak for myself that I am really disappointed not to have heard some acknowledgement that there could have been any sort of mistake or error here. And I'm also, it was very disappointing to hear the implied justification by reference to Mr. Paz Flores' Corey, which out of concern for his privacy could not be shared further, but clearly implying that there were things there that justified what happened here. And as his lawyer, so my official role here is actually to represent him as a witness in the U.S. Department of Labor's case. But in that role, I've been in close contact and have had access to the documents both from his workers' comp case and his immigration case. And I have reviewed those carefully. I reviewed all the criminal records that exist from either Massachusetts or Florida. I've reviewed his Corey. I reviewed his FBI background check. I can tell you that with his permission and with the permission of his immigration lawyer, that there has never been a criminal arrest warrant at any point. He does have an immigration deportation order from 2002. I can tell you that he has never had any criminal conviction other than a minor motor vehicle related issue from Florida in 2006. And that apart from that, there have been no criminal charges that have not been promptly dismissed or dropped and that although there are a couple things that go way back, they were dismissed and dropped, and that those are from 2006 or earlier. Apart from, again, a minor motor vehicle charge from 2010 that also was dismissed.
Thank you.
I just, given the nature of the allusion to his criminal record, we just felt that it was really important to clarify that.
Thank you.
And then just very briefly on the identity issue, his full name is Jose Martin Paz Flores. I think we all know that there are many people who use variations of their names. There's people in this room who go by variations of their names. In the Spanish-speaking world, people have long names with multiple parts. I think that speaks for itself.
I don't think there's any question on this side of the table about that. And
Okay.
and to be quite honest, that's as it was reported in the press, which which is also not the crux of the issue here anyway. But I do appreciate the clarity on it.
Right, and I appreciate that. I appreciate that you appreciate that it's not the crux of the issue. But given the
Sure.
allusion that was made and the failure to provide any concrete information, and I think the way that that could be perceived, we felt that we needed to clarify that.
And I think Councilor Edwards' earlier comments on the former employer and their misdeeds, and the fact that, we're here talking about how worried we are about the Trump administration's immigration enforcement, and then here we are relying on their Labor Department to do something in this case that really brought this to light. It's an unusual situation, and it's troubling, very troubling, I think, for the city of Boston. So obviously we spent a lot of time with Commissioner Gross and his team talking about their procedures and what they feel can and should be done, and we're going to continue doing that. But certainly for this panel, clarifying some of the earlier comments is helpful. Hearing the individual story and how that has impacted Mr. Paz Flores, and also from other advocates here, how this body, both from a, for lack of a better word, public relations standpoint, can make sure that the Trust Act and its intent and effect have the spirit that we want to see in this city, but also what needs to be done to strengthen it from a technical perspective, from legislation, from orders, whether it's through the mayor's or the police commissioner's office. That's what we need to be doing here to make sure we address these issues. Did you?
I just wanted to briefly say, recognize, one, I'm going to have to leave early, which is in no way, shape, or form meaning that I cannot, or am not interested in what you have to say. It is because of back-to-back meetings that are happening that I will have to leave. But I wanted to acknowledge my former colleague, Audrey. Thank you so much for stepping up, and legal services in general. That's where I also cut my teeth and learned how to represent these workers at Greater Boston Legal Services. And to my former classmate at Washington College of Law and American University, Laura and I graduated from the same law school. It's kind of awesome to be in this position, to have you at the ACLU and here over at the City Council. So, of course, Diego and Karen, we've been in the trenches for some time. So I just had to say that before I'm going to listen, and then I'm going to step out.
Thank you. I do also want to recognize Councilor Flynn and Council President Campbell have joined us as well. So I will turn it over if you would like to speak, how you would like to communicate your story, and then move down the line. But if we can, yeah.
Buenos días.
Buenos días.
Mi nombre es Martín Paz Flores.
Good morning. My name is Martín Paz Flores.
Padre de 5 hijos, es mi esposa presente.
I'm the father of 5 children and my wife who is present by my side.
Emigré hace casi 20 años de mi país, Honduras.
I immigrated here from my country about approximately 20 years ago from my country, Honduras.
Después del asesinato de mi hermano,
After my younger brother was assassinated,
decidí emigrar hacia este hermoso país que da muchas oportunidades.
I decided to migrate to this country, which offers so many new beginnings.
hace muchos años residí en Florida.
I lived for a number of years in Florida.
Me invitaron en una ocasión a trabajar aquí a Boston, Massachusetts.
But I was invited to work here in Massachusetts. A work opportunity presented itself
Por mejores oportunidades de vida.
for better opportunities in life.
El momento que llegué, tuve la oportunidad de hacerme miembro de la Unión del Distrito 35 de Boston.
I was able to become a member of Local 35 in construction.
Trabajé mucho, después el trabajo bajó.
I worked a lot to support my family, but the level of work offered was diminished.
Se me presentó la oportunidad de trabajar en una diferente compañía en la cual tuve un accidente.
An opportunity presented itself to work at another company, and there I suffered an injury at work.
Fue ahí desde el momento que después del accidente llegué hacia el hospital.
I was injured and was taken to the hospital.
Actualmente en el siguiente día me operaron de mi pierna, que se me quebró el hueso de la pierna izquierda.
The following day, I was operated on for the fracture of my left leg.
De ahí empecé a sufrir con mi familia.
That brought on another level of suffering with my family.
Tanto económicamente como psicológicamente.
Both economically and psychologically.
En una ocasión, después del accidente, no tenía con qué sostener mi familia.
At some point, I didn't any longer have an ability to sustain my family, to support my family.
El motivo fue que la compañía no tenía seguro.
And the reason for that was that the company hadn't had the workers' comp insurance.
Aproximadamente 2 meses sin sostén económico.
After about 2 months of having no economic income,
El patrón me invitó a su oficina para hacerme un apoyo económico, supuestamente.
My employer asked me to come to his office with the offer of some financial support, supposedly.
En ese momento que yo fui a la oficina, al salir de la oficina, oficiales de migración me arrestaron.
As I left his office, I was arrested by immigration officers.
Explicándoles yo que venías de la oficina de mi patrón por un apoyo económico porque me había quebrado la pierna.
I explained to them that I was coming from my employer's office who had offered me economic support because I had broken my leg.
El cual no importó, estando con mi hijo pequeño, Brandon de 2 años, y un amigo que me acompañaba a darme ray.
But that was not of concern to them, and so despite being accompanied by my 2-year-old son and a friend who had given us a ride,
en ese momento me arrestaron y no sabía qué hacer con mi hijo, el cual tenían que detenerme y no hallábamos qué hacer con mi hijo.
so at that point they arrested me, but was not at all clear what to do with my 2-year-old son.
Tuve que llamar a mi esposa. Mi esposa andaba haciendo unas diligencias, el cual pues de ahí, de ese momento, yo no sabía qué hacer.
I called my wife, who was running errands, and we spoke, but we really didn't know what to do.
O qué iba a pasar con mi familia, porque todos dependían de mí o dependen de mí.
Or what would happen to my family, because the whole family depends on my income, depended and depends on my income.
Estando arrestado, al siguiente día me llevaron a las oficinas de Burlington, el cual usaba mis dos muletas. Me esposaron de las dos muletas y de los pies.
The next morning, I was taken to the ICE office in Burlington on crutches, handcuffed to my crutches and manacled at the ankles.
El cual tuve un accidente al querer subirme al vehículo de la policía y me resbalé y me caí.
Which led me to fall as I was getting into the van and when I slipped.
Dijeron que era su trabajo.
But they said that was their procedure.
Necesitaba medicina, no las obtuve.
I needed medicines that I had trouble getting.
Desde ese momento la vida, tanto como para mí como para mi familia, ha sido muy difícil en todo aspecto.
Since that moment, my life has been difficult in every sense.
El cual hasta una de mis hijas hizo una historia sobre lo que pasábamos, el cual hasta le dieron la oportunidad de escribir su historia en el libro presente.
My daughter actually wrote a story of her experience with this that was published in this book.
En lo cual pues ella representa el sufrimiento y el dolor de que hemos pasado.
In which she expressed the pain and the suffering that we have gone through
Y
and that
pues
she has gone through.
lo que he hecho en este país es trabajar para que mi familia viva bien, sean personas de bien.
I have dedicated myself in my years in this country to make my family into a good family and to contribute.
En luchar por ellos.
And to struggle for them.
Gracias por escuchar parte de mi historia, pues es difícil.
Thank you for hearing my story. It's hard.
Thank you for sharing. Gracias. It's why we're here. It's why it's so important that cities like Boston, I think, do whatever we can to stand up to these un-American and inhuman policies that are being enacted by the Trump administration. So I know we're going to hear from some other folks, and I'll reserve my comments. But thank you for sharing your story and for being here and for standing up for yourself, your family, and so many people in similar situations.
Gracias.
Mi nombre es Rosa Benítez, esposa de José Martín Paz. Gracias por haberme invitado. acompañarlos aquí presente.
My name is Rosa Benitez. I'm the wife of Martin Paz. Thank you for allowing us to speak.
Y estamos aquí pues dando voz y voto para personas como precisamente nosotros y otras que sufrimos esta situación.
We're here to speak for ourselves, but for others who are facing the same situation.
En mi caso es algo recordar lo que pasé ese momento del arresto de mi esposo. Como él comentó, el sostén de la familia. Soy madre de 5 hijos, tenemos 5 hijos.
I'm referring to the arrest of my husband, father of my 5 children.
Y ese momento fue algo que no se lo deseo pues ni a ninguno en ese momento difícil que yo pasamos.
The experience that we went through, that we went through, is something I won't wish on anyone.
Cuando él lo arrestaron, yo andaba me recuerdo que estábamos estaba aquí por las tiendas de Primark.
I remember getting the call that when he was arrested, that I was at the Primark stores.
Y él me decía, fíjate que yo vine a traer me hizo una cita el patrón y yo venía por el dinero que necesitamos para sostenerlos, porque como él se había caído y había fracturado su pierna, andaba con muletas. Ese momento que su patrón le llamó a recoger ese dinero que se necesitaba.
He told me that he had gone to his employer's office to collect money that we needed to support our children.
Entonces, me dice, fíjate que me detuvieron unos agentes de la policía, no sé qué son, pero yo pienso que me van a detener. Entonces le digo, ¿pero cómo? Tú andas fracturado, andas con tus muletas, entonces...
He told me that he said, look, it looks as I've been stopped by officers. I don't know exactly who. And I answered to him, but how is that possible? You're on crutches.
Y yo preocupada me dijo, no, ellos creo que me van a detener, entonces tienes que venir por el niño.
And they said, but they are going to detain me. I need you to come and collect our kid.
Yo estaba pues asustada. Entonces le digo, pero ¿cómo? ¿A dónde? No sé dónde te encuentras. En la agonía. Entonces mis minutos se hacían horas para yo correr hacia el niño, mi niño que estaba.
And I said, but how? I couldn't understand in the agony of that moment how I would find him to collect my 2-year-old.
Fue algo muy difícil y hasta este momento pues estamos todavía gracias a apoyo. En esos días me encontraba pues triste con mis hijas en la escuela, ellos estudiando, yo no sabía cómo decirles, su papá está detenido. No había una solución para ellas. I
didn't know what to tell my daughters that their father had been detained.
Y recuerdo que gracias recibí unas llamadas. Y yo me sentí, pues, yo tenía miedo de abrir la puerta, de salir. Yo decía, no, pero porque sentía miedo, el miedo que en veces nos agobia en ese momento a la familia, en esta situación que pasa, que han pasado.
And we were swamped in that moment with fear. When people would come to the door, we,
Y pues mi experiencia es, mi voz aquí es que estamos juntos, o sea, que nos escuchen, que somos seres humanos y que haya una voz de, creo yo que como de que la policía no tenga nada que ver en presentar estos casos con ellos, con inmigración.
we're here as human beings to ask that the police not get engaged with these immigration issues.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we'll move along.
I just want to thank you, Martine and Rosa, for sharing your story and your courage to share the story because, you know, we go on with our lives every day and we forget what it's like, you know, in the shoes of someone else who's more vulnerable. I think that, you know, society can only be more humane if we can often put ourselves in the shoes of someone else who's more vulnerable. So I just want to thank them for their courage and to remind us, you know, what is it like to be humane? What is it like to have a humane government, have a humane police department, be a humane law enforcement agent or agency? So, my name is Karen Chen. I'm speaking on behalf of the Immigrant Worker Center Collaborative. And the Immigrant Worker Center Collaborative was found in 2005, is to bring together immigrant worker centers for peer learning and mutual support in workers' right education, addressing workplace injustice, direct action organizing, and policy change. So there are 8 worker centers that are part of the IWCC. 4 of them are in Boston. They're the Brazilian Worker Center, Brazilian Women's Group, the Chinese Progressive Association, and Mascosh, and they're here today. And also there are worker centers outside of Boston that include CCT in New Bedford, Chelsea Collaborative, Metro West, Lynn Worker Center. Even though not all of our worker centers are located in Boston, but many of us serve workers who work in Boston. So, you know, as IWCC member organizations, we represent the most vulnerable workers. So these are workers who take on the hardest work, but face the most exploitation. So they're most prone to retaliation when they assert their rights. And, you know, with the most recent attack on immigrants, it makes it even harder for our members and for constituents to stand up for our rights. I say our rights because when workers stand up for their rights, it's all of our rights, because injury to one is injury to all. So, you know, we want to thank Mayor Walsh and the City Council being such a strong support and advocate of the immigrants and immigrant community, and especially when the federal government took on extreme measures to attack immigrants and stripping away immigrant rights. We are proud that Boston is one of the cities expressed the strongest support for immigrants, making it one of the most welcoming cities in the nation. It is critical for Boston to continue to lead the nation, to show the rest of country what does it mean to be a welcoming city, and to be a role model that honors immigrant contributions and the critical role that immigrants play in keeping this country running. So as worker centers, we always told workers that come to a center that you have to stand up and assert our rights. Whether it's a wage theft issue, workplace injury, unfair policy, or discrimination, we assure them that there will not be immigration consequences. So with this incident with Martin, it really, the trust between workers and law enforcement has been damaged. It created even more fear amongst workers who are vulnerable to abusive employers, and they will be even more fearful of seeking help. So everyone is talking about, the Census 2020, how it's important that we need to reach every Bostonian. And to do that, we must regain the confidence of the immigrant community, that making sure that when they stand up for our rights, so that there would not be negative consequences. So we're here to ask the City Council, law enforcement agencies, the city departments under Mayor Walsh, to work with us to regain the community's trust, the confidence to stand up against workplace injustice and abusive employers like Terra Construction. So when the Boston Trust Act passed in 2014, it was a proud moment for all Bostonians. And many of us in the Asian American community, who are often, we have the highest number of undocumented people, but they're living under the shadow. We think that there's a hope that they can assert their rights, they can live their lives just like everyone else. And the intent and the spirit of the Trust Act, we hope that it will transpire to positive change in policies and practices so that what happened to Martin and his family doesn't happen again, and many, many other families who probably is still facing a lot of fear to even share the story or that when their rights are violated. So to ensure trust, we want to make the following recommendations. We ask that we should evaluate how the police and other city departments interact with federal immigration authorities, and that to share this information with the community of preventing situations like this where someone else reporting a crime resulted in immigration detention. And that, earlier the commissioner said about education, right, and how they work. And this is how they will help the community understand how law enforcement happens and how where the community can play their part and that the law enforcement play their part. And we create a situation where it's win-win. And we want to limit it. We want to ensure that the city is very clear on limiting circumstances and type of crimes that cause cooperation with ICE. No doubt that that law enforcement agency needs to enforce the laws. But we need to know how do we work together so that there isn't more victim or that people won't be victimized in more than one ways. And that it could be, when these type of situation happens, like the incident Martin, maybe that a higher level authorization is required so that, before we act and hurt others, and we can actually get the community together. And, Councilor Asabi said that, the East Boston High School Police, they would know the students the best. And why wouldn't we rely on that instead of some kind of ICE, record? So we want trust to build so that when incidents like this happens, we don't need to go to the press. We'll talk to each other directly. I really wish that the panel of law enforcement agency was still here so they can hear that this is a humane story and that we are committed, the community is committed to work with the city and all the city departments to ensure everyone's safety, just like they would. But we need them to work with us. We need them to understand what is it like, for an experienced or immigrant. So I'll stop there, and thank you.
Thank you. And we'll go to Laura from the ACLU, and then my colleagues have questions or comments to make. But go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Laura Rotillo. I am a staff counsel and a community advocate with the ACLU of Massachusetts, and I want to first and foremost thank, of course, the council for calling this important meeting. It's really encouraging to see you create this open space and dialogue where we can really talk about what has happened and move forward together with a view to perhaps updating the Trust Act. In 2014, I, along with immigrants from around the city, stood here in a packed room. Those of you who are here, led by Councilor Zagum, will remember that we really packed this room to talk about the Boston Trust Act, and that each counselor stood up and talked about their own immigrant heritage, about the immigrant heritage of their constituents, and about their contributions to the city. Of course, nobody wants our police to become agents of ICE. As Commissioner Gross himself said, we are not agents of ICE. So I want to talk about the things that Boston is doing well and the things where we're sort of falling short to protect the immigrants in our city. First, of course, passing the Trust Act was a pledge not to detain people on behalf of Immigration and Customs Enforcement. This was an early commitment, which is now state law. Second, public pronouncements of support from city councilors, from the commissioners, from Mayor Walsh have had a positive impact in setting the tone. I recall clearly just days after the Trump inauguration where Mayor Walsh offered this very building and his very office as a refuge to those seeking protection. The citywide mural project entitled To Immigrants with Love has been a visible manifestation of that support with beautiful art around the city. The Office for Immigrant Advancement has also provided necessary free resources to immigrants living in the city and working in the city. These are all very important and praiseworthy steps, but there's more that Boston can do, and I want to talk about that. We're here today because the case of Mr. Paz Flores has raised some very serious questions about the city's commitment to both workers and immigrant communities. How does the city continue to establish trust when its police officers are used as an instrument of harm? This case makes clear that there is no discernible policy delineating when police can collaborate with ICE. There seem to be no limits on when a police officer can take it upon themselves to call an immigration agent and collaborate in the way that this case makes clear, and nothing from Sergeant Detective Gallagher or Commissioner Gross really contradicted what the press said, that in fact they worked together hand in hand, that at the end of the day it was Sergeant Detective Gallagher or somebody below him who told ICE where Mr. Paz Flores was going to be. That led him to a ruse, essentially, where he was to be arrested. Commissioner Gross asked, what did we do wrong? And perhaps under the policy they did nothing wrong. Perhaps that is true. But I would submit that that is wholly inconsistent with the statements about not being agents of ICE. When they're working together hand in hand to find people to deport, that is completely inconsistent with the spirit of the Trust Act and with the spirit of the statements that the police department themselves have made. There is no police rule or regulation that would prohibit this from happening again, and that is a serious issue that we need to look at. Secondly, we know that every day, police officers share information that helps facilitate the deportation of our friends and neighbors. Boston police officers routinely enter reports into their own databases, and Commissioner Gross said our databases are our databases, but in fact, a database called CopLink, public records requests recently revealed, is shared automatically and without limits with ICE. All of those Boston police reports that are shared in CopLink, to be clear, are shared immediately, automatically with ICE, and there seem to be no limits. And we only know about this through a public records request. This seemingly routine data entry could seem innocuous, but it puts Boston's immigrant community at grave risk of harm, and yet it happens on a regular basis with no public discussion. Third, police officers stationed at the Boston schools, and we already heard about the East Boston case, also collaborate with the deportation of our young people by just labeling them with flimsy evidence of gang activity. And that evidence could be as flimsy as wearing a specific color, or worse yet, standing next to a person who is wearing that color. The point system is deeply flawed, and we know that the gang database also is shared with ICE. The lawsuit that was mentioned earlier today is simply a lawsuit about the records. We do not know enough about that database because we have not seen the records around that database. We don't know how it works, but we know that it is shared with ICE somehow. And that brings me to the last point. Well, first I want to say that I just want to clarify that both CopLink and the database sharing, none of this is mandatory. We do know that there's some mandatory data sharing that happens when a person is arrested and fingerprinted, and that goes to ICE. But the sharing of CopLink and our own gang database is not mandated by federal law. And so that is something that we have full control of as a city. Lastly, the lack of transparency pertaining to these issues obstructs this council and from the public from really holding the police department accountable. Despite these public statements of support, the city has not been forthcoming about its policies and practices, especially relating to the police. Because of this outrageous request, we now know about something called the BPD ICE Task Force, and we know more about Sergeant Detective Gallagher's work especially. When the ACLU and the Greater Boston Legal Services filed an information request under the Public Records Law, the police department's response was slow and incomplete. It's been almost a month and we have still to see a single document relating to this task force. So I want to end with just 5, I think, simple recommendations that echo what have already been said. Number 1, the city must be transparent about any and all collaboration with ICE. This first step is a crucial show of good faith and necessary for Bostonians to be able to hold the city accountable. Number 2, we suggest a citywide audit of all departments to ask what they are doing to collaborate with ICE, how they're sharing information, and what steps they take on a day-to-day basis that may seem innocuous but are actually aiding immigration agencies in their deportation efforts. Number 3, we need clear, enforceable policies curtailing collaboration with ICE. And number 4, we need to make sure that once those policies are enacted, that they are also subject to regular training. And lastly, District Attorney Rollins was here earlier, and as we all know, she has this policy of not enforcing 15 different charges, of not prosecuting 15 different charges. We would suggest that the police department has no business arresting people on those 15 charges that will not later be prosecuted. That is a waste of resources because those charges are going to be dismissed. But for immigrants, of course, those mere arrests have deep consequences. As we've seen, anytime a person is arrested because of secure communities, they can be put immediately into a deportation pipeline. We would suggest that the police department and the city work together with DA Rollins to really take a look at not arresting people on those 15 charges that won't later be prosecuted. In closing, I just want to thank the council for this opportunity to speak. The ACLU has worked with the city for many years on these issues, and we pledge to continue to be a resource and to continue to look at updating the Trust Act.
Thank you, Laura. I want to turn over to if my colleagues have any questions or comments in the order of their arrival. Who's still here? Councilor Sabi George, do you have any?
I'm actually okay. Well, I guess I'll just say I really appreciate your sharing your very personal story, Martine and Rosa, and appreciate that you're all here today to share some of your thoughts and certainly a little bit about your work. Thank you.
Thank you. And Council President Campbell.
Thank you, Councilor Zakem, for your leadership. And it was a wonderful moment. I was not on the council then, but of course followed what the work of the council. So thank you for your leadership and your continued leadership on this. Thank you, of course, to the advocates in the room, not just sort of on the panel, but also in the room for the work that you did to even make that happen. I also want to thank the commissioner and his team because they do, I think we all recognize, have a difficult task, right, in ensuring that our communities are safe, that when incidents of violence happen, there is an adequate and reasonable response from police in certain communities. It's not easy to say, to protect and serve. We just had an awful tragic murder in Mattapan where I lived this weekend. So they have a tough job. But that being said, I think this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity not to take a defensive posture, but to say, how can we do better? We're always talking about, even if we're excellent, we can always do better. And government does better when we sort of step into these conversations with an open mind, with an ear towards listening, versus being reactive. And so to that point, I just want to thank you guys for sharing your story. I mean, I'm finding myself taking deep breaths these days because when you share powerful stories like that, it can also have you almost trigger your own trauma or different things. So I applaud your courage to come here and to share it in a public setting on the record. And I have to say, I believe you. I believe your story. I believe that what happened to you is exactly what happened. It's concerning, it's disturbing, it's upsetting. There are moments of frustration, anger, a range of emotions, so thank you for sharing. And now that we know this story, and I'm sure there are more, the question is, what are we going to do about it? And one thing I really loved about this panel is you put forth reasonable and rational things that we can do in response. Every department should be held to a standard of transparency, including the council as a legislative branch of government. We should all be thinking about how do we do this audit, especially given the climate and what's happening and coming out of Washington. So I look forward to working with Councilor Zakem on that. Also, this idea of training. We often ask our departments to do a lot, but don't provide them with the resources, the human capital to do proper training. And so I think that's a question we need to be grappling with, especially as we receive the budget tomorrow. And lastly, I'll just say, we can't keep waiting or pushing the can down the road. You know, people are waiting for us to respond in a timely manner. It's unfortunate that record requests are taking so long, especially when you have someone courageous enough to come forward and share their story. And to do it not only for themselves, but for others. So I think there's ways in which we can push. And I look forward to partnering with Councilor Zakem in terms of next steps. I apologize for missing the beginning part. I was at a school visit. But thank you again. And to the lawyers in the room, as a lawyer as well, you know, thank you for the work that you do day in and day out. We have, you know, lawyers going down to the border and doing some really hard work. And sometimes they're not making it back, right? They're having trouble even coming back if they're a U.S. citizen. You hear these stories. And so thank you to the lawyers and to the advocates for the work that you're doing day in, day out in a very, very tough climate. Appreciate you. And so thank you. Thank you, Councilor Zakem.
Thank you, Madam President. I just want to say a couple things, and then we're going to move on to the public testimony. But again, thank you all for being here, for your work every day, for sharing your personal stories that illuminates why this is so important. You know, this hearing is not about finding fault with the Boston Police Department. It's about making sure that the city of Boston is not complicit in the inhumane, un-American, xenophobic actions of the Trump administration. As much as we all may like and want to prevent them and stop them at the national level, we can't do that today or tomorrow, someday. But what we can do here in the city of Boston is make sure that not on our behalf, not using our resources, our police department, our agencies, our tax dollars to do this. Laura, you talked about when we passed the Trust Act 5 years ago, people sharing their stories and their immigrant history, whether it was themselves, parents, grandparents, how people have come here to the city of Boston or to this country. And it is troubling, more than troubling, the things that are happening. Your story, and I know it happens every day across this country and in the Commonwealth to people similarly situated, is something that should never have been in the United States, but is happening every day. It's something that is reminiscent of stories from other countries, from the Nazis, from other agencies and security services that pulled people aside, separating them from their families. I mentioned earlier President Trump is purging his Homeland Security Department right now, leadership, because they're not tough enough, because they're not cruel enough, because they're not evil enough to immigrants in our communities. So we can't stop him from doing that, but what we can do and what we are going to do, and I do intend to work with my colleagues, with Commissioner Gross, with the mayor, on fixes and updates to this Trust Act and on policy, and we're going to continue this docket and this hearing as there is information. Laura, you mentioned information that you've requested. We filed for this week in the City Council hearing under the provisions of Section 17F of the general laws, which requires the administration to provide that information within a week. I look forward to working with my colleagues to pass that on Wednesday and to get that information here. Again, not to find fault, but to find out what the current practices are and how we can continue to move forward in the spirit that we've all talked about today. everyone who spoke today. So I thank you all for being here. I know there are folks who have signed in to provide other testimony. You're certainly welcome to stay seated there or to return to the gallery as we hear from a few other folks. And we're going to be wrapping up. I know there are other hearings, and I know people have other things that they have to do today. But thank you again, and thank you for being here. And I will now call down in the order that people have signed in if they've asked to testify. And if you can come to either of the podiums where District Attorney Rollins spoke on either side. We have Amy Grunder from the Mira Coalition, and Kerry Doyle, Kevin Balt, and I think Ginny Zanger. Amy, if you want to kick things off.
I thought this was the one that worked.
Hopefully they both work, so we'll see.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Amy Grunder, and thank you, Councilor Zakem and Councilor Edwards, who was here previously, the Council President and the Civil Rights Committee, for the opportunity to testify today for the Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition. We applaud, I'm going to echo what a lot of other people said, right? We applaud the efforts of the Boston City Council and the Office of the Mayor to limit the participation of police in immigration enforcement, beginning with the passage of the really groundbreaking Trust Act in 2014 and continuing with this hearing. In this terrifying new era of no-holds-barred immigration enforcement, such efforts are more critical than ever in restoring confidence in all of our public officials, especially the police. Therefore, we share the concerns of the committee about the really distressing case that prompted this hearing, and like many others here, we would like clarification about the scope and the content of the Boston Police Department policies governing their involvement in assisting ICE with non-criminal immigration matters. As has been stated, the facts of this case as we understand them are outside the scope of the Trust Act as currently written, which only prohibits police from detaining someone for a civil immigration violation who would otherwise be free to go. In any case, the Trust Act has been largely superseded by the Supreme Judicial Court's 2017 decision in Commonwealth versus Lunn, which made clear that our police do not have this authority. But the Trust Act, as currently written, and was just stated, offers no guidance limiting other kinds of police participation in immigration enforcement, which can include things like notifying ICE of a person's impending release from police custody, or, as in this case, alerting ICE to a person's whereabouts who is not in custody at all for the purpose of assisting a civil immigration arrest instead of a criminal arrest for fraud or whatever. Without clear and publicized limits for police involvement in immigration activities, members of Boston's immigrant communities can't safely turn to public officials for help, and they effectively lose access to all the protections of the law, protections from domestic abuse and other crimes, from wage theft, and from dangerously substandard housing. The list goes on. This harms everybody. Mira, therefore, we encourage the City Council, the Mayor's Office, and the Boston Police Department to develop, with stakeholder input, written guidelines delineating the extent and the nature of police involvement with immigration and customs enforcement, at a minimum prohibiting notice to ICE for the purpose of assisting in a civil arrest for an immigration matter, because of course removal proceedings are always civil, and in the alternative or in addition, that the Council consider updating the Trust Act to provide guidelines on when police can provide notice to ICE, as well as a transparent reporting mechanism of such referrals or notice to the Council. That's all I have. It's really heartening to be here today. Thank you so much for calling this here.
Thank you, Amy. We have Kerry.
Hi.
Hi.
Good afternoon, Council Chair Zakem, Council President Campbell, and Councilor Asahi George. My name is Kerry Doyle. I've been an immigration attorney for 26 years. I worked both in the nonprofit sector and now in practice with another attorney, small firm in Boston. So I'm a business owner in Boston, and I'm also a resident of Boston as well. So I want to thank you for this hearing. I was mainly going to speak about BRIC and the impact of BRIC, but I also want to take a minute to perhaps add some additional information to enlighten some of the conversation that happened previously from my own experience in my practice. The council should be aware that, and I was a little surprised that BPD, Commissioner Gross and Detective Sergeant Gallagher, didn't speak more fully about the fact that ICE and ICE's arrest authorities are frequently used to retaliate against individuals. It's very common. In fact, at the moment, I'm representing an individual, he's not from Boston, but he had been threatened by an individual who wanted money to prevent his deportation. And when he refused to pay this individual money, the person, I don't know if he works with ICE or just gave an anonymous tip, which ICE followed up. And my client has been detained now for 8 months and will probably be deported this week, barring something happening. I've also represented an individual whose husband turned her into ICE because she was seeking child support, and he didn't want to pay child support, and he got her deported. So it happens every single day that ICE, their enforcement authorities are used in retaliation. We just met with individuals from Homeland Security Investigations on my current client, and they're perfectly aware that they're used in this manner and have no compunction about it or concern about it. And my great concern is that in this particular case, and again, I'm sure in other instances as well that we see, that BPD is being used by ICE to go after individuals who are often being retaliated against through the ICE system, and that they're becoming part of that retaliation. And that I think BPD needs to be much more suspect and much less involved in ICE enforcement and providing information with ICE enforcement. On the second item, which is the BRIC, as you mentioned, what's happened frequently, and I think especially after 9/11, police departments and other law enforcement agencies suddenly realized that ICE and Homeland Security Investigations has this incredibly broad authority. They have so much authority and power. They can arrest people without probable cause, without any, real support behind it, legal support, where other agencies can't do that. And so I think since then, this cooperation has developed, which again, in some way can be helpful because we do need to track actual terrorism and actual threats against our community, but it's also been used against our immigrant population, immigrant communities in Boston and across the Commonwealth and across the country to go after these people without proper legal authority, without proper screening of the information that's being used. So for example, there is the unfortunate incident that Commissioner Gross talked about with the individual that was identified in BRIC as being a gang member who was released, and I work in a committee of lawyers that were trying to address these issues, the gang issues. And the problem is that the BRIC is such a broad tool. Like it's this huge tool that's used against people in this broad way and without really proper information and accurate information in the BRIC. So it's very hard to tell who's really a danger and who is improperly accused. And so I have another client who's now been detained for 2 years. I just got his second remand. We have a hearing tomorrow in the immigration court on his case, and he's being detained because of BRIC information. And when they say, and so in his case, for example, in the BRIC, it says that he's a self-admitted gang member, but he's never admitted to anybody that he's a member of a gang. There's no proof that he's a member of a gang. And so what happens is data is put into the BRIC, and from my understanding, just in meetings and some of the work we've done, that BPD and other police departments don't use the BRIC for any real law enforcement reason because the information is so unreliable. They can't use it in courts, and they don't even use it on the streets. And yet, the information that the Boston, the police that are at the schools and the BPD itself, when they're putting information into the BRIC, that information is getting into the hands of ICE, and ICE is presenting it to the immigration judges who are taking it as truth. And these individuals that are named in the BRIC are being detained without being released, and they're being deported. My client is eligible for a green card. He's also eligible for asylum, and he's been denied both because of the information in the BRIC. And so even though, the trusts address a very specific issue, but I think it's important to understand that the law enforcement The ICE uses many tools, and that BPD and the City of Boston is being brought into the system by ICE in these other very nefarious ways that is really negatively impacting the immigrant community in the city.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No. And as I believe, is this Kevin?
Yes.
Kevin's coming up, and I know we have Ginny as well, and then just let me, the last name who signed in is, I think it's a Matt Cameron, who if he is here, come on up, but go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Councilor Zakem, for having this hearing. First of all, thank you, Council President Campbell and Council Member Asabi George. This is very important. I'm glad to see the other councilors were here for at least part of it, including our councilor from Jamaica Plain, Matt O'Malley. We're here, several of us from Jamaica Plain, as part of a group that is very concerned about immigrant rights and advocate in various ways, including at the State House for the Safe Communities Act. Just in passing, having witnessed the hearing, I'm struck by the fact that not only did Commissioner Gross and Officer Gallagher leave, but there was a whole departure en masse of what appeared to be supporters, other police officers, and weren't around to hear the very impressive panel for Mr. Paz Flores. I just can't understand why they would be here only to represent themselves and be defensive as they appeared to be without even wanting to hear what other folks had to say. If there's any opportunity for professional training, this would be it. It's not to go to sensitivity sessions to learn about immigrants. It's to look at real situations like this and hear what people have to say. Because this story that we heard from Mr. Paz Flores really contradicted what we heard from Sergeant Gallagher. So that was very disturbing that we couldn't have, now maybe many of those officers had to get back to protect us from crime, but they were here en masse at least to hear the commissioner, and so they could have spent another hour or so listening to the rest of us. That being said, there are a couple lawsuits going on to get public records. I'm incidentally involved with both of them. My law firm is representing, trying to get some of those records on the gang database from the BRIC. On another hat that I wear, I'm a board member of META, which is an advocacy organization for English language learners. And at a board meeting just recently, I heard about the East Boston incident with that student who, as I understand it, was brought before a deportation hearing, and the ICE agent said he learned about this young man from the Boston Police Department. And it turned out not to be the Boston Police Department, it was the school law enforcement folks. I wish they had been here to address that incident. That seems really important as well, because it wasn't that a school law enforcement officer called directly to ICE and said, here's this person, but it was the incident report that was filed, apparently in the BRIC, that triggered that deportation hearing of that young man, as I understand it, solely based on a statement from another student that he had an argument with, who said he was a gang member. And that kind of rumor, the hearsay upon hearsay, is what gets into the BRIC and ends up threatening the deportation of law-abiding citizens, including high school students. So thank you so much for looking into this. We on the outside need to file lawsuits for public records. You on the inside may be able to get hold of some of those records, or at least ask the questions, if not in these kinds of hearings in front of the media, then in private, as I'm glad Commissioner Gross offered to meet with Councilor Edwards. She was very impressive in asking her questions, with you, Councilor Zakem, with you, Councilor Sabi George, with you, President. Thank you so much for having this hearing. This is vitally important, not only to our immigrant community, but to all of us. This is how we keep our community safe, by encouraging undocumented people to come forward and trust in law enforcement, report crimes, report when they are victims, be good witnesses to crimes that they see, and not have to fear that they'll be vacuumed up by aggressive ICE law enforcement.
Thank you. Hi.
I guess I'm closing it down.
Sounds like it. Although if anyone who hasn't signed in would like to say something for the record, and if you can try and limit yourself to a couple minutes, that podium is open. But go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for this opportunity to voice our concerns, and thank you especially, Councilor Zakem, for taking the leadership on this, getting this act passed 5 years ago, and especially this follow-up hearing to see how can we make this act stronger and put some more teeth into it. I'll try to be brief. I have copies of this statement, but I do want to say that when I first read, and I was thrilled at the courage of Mr. Paz Flores, as Council President noted, to come here and make that statement in public. I'm so gratified to have been able to hear him. When I first read about his case, I was alarmed, and the reason I was alarmed is because for the last year I've been attending across City Hall Plaza the hearings of the ICE detainees, and they are frightening and, I have to say, despicable. It is a gulag. I have seen so many, and they're mostly men, detained for things like going to pay their child support and being picked up, and then they get stuck in this gulag for weeks, months, and in some cases years, for things like a missing tail light, and then perhaps deported, and their wives and children are then left as Mr. Paz Flores' wife was, with very little means of support, and often end up in homeless shelters, as I've seen. So I'm ashamed as an American of the injustices, and I think you've pointed out that we are living in a context, and that was what was so frightening to me about hearing from the police today, that the context was missing. But we are living in a national context which is frightening, and I'm proud that our city has taken a stand against this, and I'm pleased that we're taking a look at how we can better enforce this ordinance that's so important. And I just wanted to say, and perhaps Councilor Asabi George also saw, I was a Boston public school teacher with undocumented students, and I saw the toll that it took on them, knowing that even though they know they have a right to an education, our immigrant communities are living in a traumatized state of fear, many of them. They are being terrorized by ICE, and I think that and today I'm gratified that we're beginning to look into BRIC and how the Boston Public Schools police and counselors said, yes, they are very sympathetic to students, but the data that they are sharing through BRIC is the bridge to ICE, and I am encouraged that you are going to be looking more closely into this. So thank you very much for this opportunity today.
Thank you so much. As we conclude our testimony, if my colleagues, Councilor Asabi George, if you have a closing remarks, or Council President Campbell, okay, then I will close this hearing on docket 0518. I want to thank everyone for their participation, for your support, for being here. From the perspective of this committee, there is still more to learn and to information to gather on this topic. As I mentioned, we filed a 17F request that will be introduced at tomorrow's council meeting. So we will be having a follow-up hearing when that information is presented. I also do intend to provide, to work with my colleagues, with the mayor, with Commissioner Gross, and with many of the stakeholders here on updates, amendments, whatever term we want to use, to the Boston Trust Act to make sure that incidents, as occurred with Mr. Paz Flores, whether it was a one-off or whether it's happening frequently, we want to provide guidance to the men and women of the Boston Police Department. I think we share philosophically the same approach here, as that was clear from Commissioner Gross. And I do want to say again, this hearing and these proceedings are about moving forward, I think, constructively, safely, humanely, in a way that, to my mind, actually comports more with the Constitution of the United States and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts than what's happening with ICE and with immigration enforcement across this country right now. So thank you all. With that, we will adjourn this hearing on docket 0518. Thank you very much.